As the Trump administration comes to the close of their first year, they've launched their national security strategy. Published in November of 2025, it lays out how the Trump administration looks at our vital national interest. Today, we're going to unpack that a little bit, and we're going to talk about how the Trump administration wants to approach their national security interest across the world, and specifically what they want to do here in our own near abroads in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in the southern part. Let's get to it. Good morning. This morning, we're going to delve into the new Trump administration national security strategy. And we're going to talk about some of the global perspectives that align with that strategy. And then we're going to walk down a little bit into the southern hemisphere to our near broads. The administration, I believe everyone would agree, has been unapologetic in its pursuing its stated platform objectives, the same things that President Trump campaigned on. Some have applauded that and others have decried that. But one thing that is completely clear is that his focus on the homeland has been renewed. More than any other administration in recent history, there's a significant focus by the Trump administration to secure our homeland, whether that means securing our borders or whether that means the deportation of people that are perceived to be here illegally. Because of that, the Trump national security strategy reflects this flexible realism as they take a look at the world. So today we'll unpack that a little bit, and we'll talk about what that means for the markets as they go forward and what we can expect with regards to domestic and foreign policy in the future. Let's start by talking about what the national security strategy is and why it's important. A national security strategy really serves five basic purposes. First of all, it articulates what our national interests are. It defines what's important to us as the United States. Secondly, it provides strategic guidance across all elements of the government, not just the executive branch, but other partners that we deal with as well. Third, it's a communications tool, and it communicates to lots of different audiences. Certainly, it communicates within the executive branch to the organizations and agencies you see listed on the bottom left of the slide. But it also talks about or talks to internal and external audiences, the American people, Congress, the press. It talks to our allies and partners. It speaks to our adversaries, our competitors. It messages and communicates in numerous ways. It's an internal consensus building document. The national security strategy is designed so that all the elements of the federal government can come together under one vision and execute a strategy that will move us forward in the world. And finally, it provides us the opportunity to adapt to change. The national security strategy over time will ebb and flow based on what's going on in the world. The United States, really since World War II, since the Bretton Woods Conference, since this period of Pax Americana, has been the leader of the free world and has had, frankly, very few countries out there that had parity with us. The Soviet Union, from the Cold War period, from the 1950s until 1991, is probably the closest we've had to parity. And now we see China as the next rising global power that's seeking parity with us. But the national security strategy allows the president and his administration to adapt to that global climate and make changes as they see necessary. As you can see from the chart, the national security strategy takes multiple inputs, everything from what our national interests are to a grand strategy that speaks to what our vision should be, to what we are doing in the external environment, in our domestic environment. And then finally, the manifestations of this are most significantly seen with our national defense strategy and our national military strategy. If I can direct your attention to the bottom right hand of the chart, you'll see that the national defense strategy really talks about three things: ends, ways, and means. The national security strategy reflects that as well. What is it that we want to see America do? What are the goals and stated objectives? Those are the ends. The ways are simply the techniques that we're going to use in order to achieve that. Policy, a certain approach with nations of the world, a certain way to structure the government. And then the means are, frankly, the resources we use.
Most specifically, we think about things in regards to fiscal cost and monetary investment. So you see that with the Department of Homeland Security principally, and also with the Department of Defense, which represents the largest portion of our discretionary budget. So melding those ends, ways, and means together to achieve our grand strategy is what the national security strategy is really all about. So let's talk for a minute about how the Trump administration is doing this differently with the release of their November 2025 national security strategy. President Trump's foreign policy is pragmatic without being pragmatist, realistic without being realist, principled without being idealistic, muscular without being hawkish, and restrained without being dovish. It's not grounded in traditional political ideology, and it's motivated above all by what works for America. And in 2 words, that's America first. That is cut directly out of the national security strategy on the first paragraph. And it speaks to how the Trump administration and President Trump has approached his view of the world. The first rule of foreign policy is that every nation will do what is in their own best interest first. The United States is no different in that regard. Over time, we have certainly placed the interest of other nations adjacent to ours. We've certainly helped and been a good partner with them. The Trump administration is making a bit of a turn from the liberal internationalist approach of the past and really started to focus on something they call flexible realism, pursuing transactional relationships that are based on mutual interest and not necessarily on ideological alignment. This is a bit of a departure from what we've been doing over the last decades. American strategies since the Cold War, in the view of the Trump administration, have fallen short. They've not clearly defined what we hold as important as the United States, and the Trump administration, with its new national security strategy, really wants to focus back in on that. So they asked 3 questions in the strategy. What should the United States want? What are the available means to get it? And how can we connect ends and means in a viable national security strategy? I will read what I believe is important in the national security strategy so that everyone understands this is how the Trump administration views their vital interest. First and foremost, we want the continued survival and safety of the United States as an independent, sovereign republic whose government secures the God-given natural rights of its citizens and prioritizes their well-being and interests. The national security strategy also lays out what the Trump administration considers our core vital interest. Most of that, frankly, has to do with the Western Hemisphere. Even though the homeland has featured largely in most presidential administrations' national security strategies, the Trump administration underscores this by focusing on the Western Hemisphere, both North and South America and Central America. They aspire to halt and reverse some of the ongoing damage that we've seen from foreign actors in our own hemisphere. They want to support our allies in pursuing the freedom and security, particularly in Europe, and want to bring Europe back to its former greatness. They want to prevent an adversarial power from dominating what's going on in the Middle East because of the energy riches that are there. And they want to ensure that U.S. technology and U.S. standards, particularly in AI, biotech, and quantum computing, drive the world into the future. These are what the Trump administration considers our core vital national interest. To achieve these, the Trump administration lays out 10 different strategic principles. First is a focused definition of national interest. And I'd like to read this verbatim because I think it's very important to understand how they see and define national interest. Since at least the end of the Cold War, administrations have often published national security strategies that seek to expand the definition of America's national interest, such that almost no issue or endeavor is considered outside its scope. But to focus on everything is to focus on nothing. America's core national security interest shall be our focus. The Trump administration is saying we are going to narrow the focus on what we consider to be national interest. And these strategic principles are the focus definition that I just talked about, peace through strength. And you've seen that talked about by Secretary Hegseth on multiple occasions as he's represented the Department of War as the United States has gone off to conduct operations and continue operations in the Middle East, in Europe, in the Pacific, and most recently in the Southern Hemisphere. Third, a predisposition to non-interventionism. We don't want to be the country that intervenes in every conflict across the world. The Trump administration believes that has been squandering U.S. resources, and they also believe that it does not achieve the ends that we're seeking. The Trump administration is quantifying or qualifying this new approach as flexible realism, which I talked about just a moment ago. That's the fourth strategic principle. And I would like to read this verbatim from the National Security Strategy because I think it's important. U.S. policy will be realistic about what is possible and desirable to seek in its dealings with other nations. We seek good relations and peaceful commercial relations with the nations of the world without imposing on them democratic or other social changes that differ widely from their traditions and histories. We recognize and affirm that there is nothing inconsistent or hypocritical in acting according to such a realistic assessment or in maintaining good relationships with countries whose governing systems and societies differ from ours, even as we push like-minded friends to uphold our shared norms and further our interest as we do so. This is a significant departure from what we've seen in the past, where we hold accountable countries that do not have the same type of government system and may not approach their citizenry the same way that we have. I think many people would say that you've seen this approach from President Trump as he has gone back to President Putin and encouraged him to seek a peace agreement in the Ukraine, whereas former administrations may have kept Putin at arm's length and not wanted to negotiate with him based on their type of government and their type of approach to how they govern. The fifth of the priorities is primacy of nations, which goes very closely with the sixth, which is sovereignty and respect. I think what you're finding from the Trump administration in practice and now in the national security strategy is that the nation state is still the principal power base. There was a time at the turn of the millennium where we thought that globalism and multiculturalism would give non-state actors and other special interests more power than nation states. The Trump administration's national security strategy is very much focused on the sovereignty of the nation state as the principal base of power. So priorities 6 and 7 are sovereignty and respect and balance. Priorities 5 and 6 are primacy of nations and sovereignty and respect. Priority 7 is the balance of power. And what you're seeing from the Trump administration right now is trying to make sure that we don't hedge in one place and lose our ability to balance what's going on. This is probably best seen in the Indo-Pacific as we face China as a rising power and certainly as a competitor in many ways. Number 8 is the pro-American worker approach. President Trump, I think, has worked very diligently in the first year of his administration to try to bring manufacturing back to the United States. We offshored much of that manufacturing, really beginning in earnest in the 70s, 80s, and beyond. And now what we're finding is there are things that we need that we must rely on other nations for. Sometimes those other nations are sympathetic to our needs and sympathetic to our idealisms and ideology. Sometimes they're not. And so we cannot assume the risk of thinking that we will be able to use goods and material and manufacturing from other nations when it may not be available if we can't do it here. So a pro-American worker stance is important to the administration. They place fairness as their ninth priority in making sure that we are treating other nations equitably. And then competence and merit have come back into the national security strategy. Right, wrong, or indifferent, for several decades now, we have worked very diligently through different administrations to try to empower and embrace a diverse approach to how we do things, looking at diversity as a figure of merit in what we do. The Trump administration is not terribly interested in that. They are going to put primacy on competence and merit, and they are going to promote best of breed in everything that they do. The Trump administration also, with this national security strategy, wants to ensure economic security through several different things. And this speaks directly to how it's going to impact markets and what it's going to do as we move forward in the 2026 timeframe and beyond. He's looking, I think everyone can understand, for balanced trade. That's one of the imperatives for economic security. And we've seen this with the emplacement of tariffs. We've seen this with negotiations that are occurring at a multilateral and a bilateral level throughout his administration. He wants to secure access to critical supply chains and materials. Again, we've seen the Trump administration talk in very stark terms about our reliance on other people in the world to provide rare earth minerals and other critical supplies so that we can continue to drive our economy. They want to find a way to make sure that we re-embolden partnerships where we have them and invest in the U.S. where we don't have them. There's a move by the Trump administration and their national security strategy reflects this for reindustrialization. I think we've seen this as we've seen promises of investments back into our manufacturing base here in the country. The Trump administration believes that's critical to national security and to our economic security. Specific to that is the reviving of our defense industrial base. It's hard to believe that in World War II, it took us 2 years after the strike on Pearl Harbor before we could muster enough material and manufacturing power to launch our first forays into North Africa so that we could begin the European campaign. We did push capability out into the Pacific, but it was very limited. And based on decisions that were made by Roosevelt and Churchill, we were going to begin and end the European war before we moved to the Pacific. But it took us 2 years, even with our industrial might in the 40s, to be able to do that. And so as we move into this new era and we look to revitalize our industrial base, it's important to understand that we've got to be able to move at the speed of 21st century warfare, which is much faster than what we saw in the 1940s with World War II. So reinvesting in our defense industrial base is imperative. The Trump administration national security strategy highlights energy dominance as one of their critical goals for maintaining economic security. And finally, preserving and growing America's financial sector dominance. Right now, the world turns on the U.S. dollar. The Trump administration wants to see that continue to be the pacing item for the financial world. Now let's talk a little more specifically about our near abroads. In 1923, President James Monroe issued the Monroe Doctrine. This was done principally to keep our European friends and neighbors at bay. Europeans had for many decades and centuries moved into the New World, moved into the Western Hemisphere, and were trying to exact resources, trying to place colonies here, and trying to control what was going on in our hemisphere. President Monroe said, frankly, the U.S. would consider it an interference in politics and a threat to peace and security if that were to continue. This Monroe Doctrine stood for decades before finally we started to see in the late 1980s and 1990s the influence of other countries come back into our Western Hemisphere, principally in South America. What we find now is the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which is laid out in the new national security strategy. Strict border enforcement is a critical part of this. And I believe that we've seen, since President Trump came into office, real approaches towards controlling our borders, particularly our south border along the Mexico and U.S. border. Bilateral trade agreements. Multilateral trade agreements tend to be good for all. Bilateral trade agreements give you the flexibility to be able to go in and work with one country at a time to come up with the means to strengthen both economies. The Trump administration is wed to this and believes this is critical as we take a look at security in the Western Hemisphere. Trump administration has been significantly critical of former administrations in what they call the forever wars policy. And they are trying to establish a policy that would keep us away from wars of inconvenience and wars that might pull us and our national wealth into areas where we may not benefit directly. Now, this flies a bit in the face of what we saw with the B-2 strike in Iran just a couple of months ago. But importantly, as we executed that kinetic action and withdrew away from Iran, we were able to message to Iran what it was that we wanted them to hear, but we didn't put troops on the ground, and we didn't go in to try to change what they were doing by placing large formations there and a large State Department presence. So the Forever Wars policy is entrenched in the Trump national security strategy. The Hague Commitment is really based on the fact that the United States has, for decades, been one of the principal security providers for Europe. This is part of our NATO commitment, and for a long time it was very necessary as we faced a threat from the Soviet Union that really put the world at jeopardy in Eastern Europe and then also in Western Europe. Now that the Soviet Union threat has passed, and we take a look at Russia, which has become more revanchist, certainly in the last decade with Vladimir Putin in charge, the Trump administration believes that Europe needs to make more investments in their own security. And frankly, their security investments have waned because they've leaned heavily on U.S. defense capability. The Trump administration believes that needs to change going forward, and we've seen European defense states pledge more of their GDP to the collective defense of Europe, and we believe that is going to be a good thing based on the current focus of the Trump administration. And that goes to the GDP contribution goal that is so very important in Europe right now. Closer at home, here in the Western Hemisphere, the Trump administration has refocused attention on Central and South America, and to a lesser degree, Mexico. They believe that's important because there is a belief through the Trump administration that years of neglect have created opportunity for our competitors to move into this space. The South American continent is incredibly rich with regards to natural resources. There's tremendous economic capacity there. There's very favorable geography and hydrography there to be able to do many things that the world needs and many things that would benefit the United States. And as the United States and the Trump administration work with different countries in the southern part of the Western Hemisphere, it's going to move us forward into this new Trump corollary on the Monroe Doctrine. Now, as we take a look at how the Trump National Security Team looks at the rest of the world, we'll talk a little bit about parts of the world where we have interests and parts of the world where we are expecting to see less U.S. presence in the future. Then we'll move back and talk about what's going on in our near broads. In Asia, the principal thing that the Trump administration would like to do is win the economic future and prevent military confrontation. As you take a look at the incredible economic power and capacity of what is going on in Asia, particularly with China, that should be the focus in the world of where we are going to be economically over the coming decades. The Trump administration believes they see this clearly and believe that we need to continue to focus on China as a rising competitor, but also build allies and partners in and around South Asia that can hedge against China becoming the dominant power in that part of the world, but also in the world holistically. We expect to lead from a position of strength in the Indo-Pacific, since it represents almost half the world's GDP based on purchasing parity power. 1/3 of the GDP based on nominal GDP, and that share is certain to grow in the coming century. Going forward, we will rebalance America's economic relationship with China. It's important that we not antagonize China in the same way that it's important China not antagonize us. I think to a certain degree, we get very wrapped around the Taiwan scenario as something that drives policy and has driven policy for a while. I believe the Trump administration would like to expand that approach with China, find an equitable trade agreement framework with China, and continue to support Taiwan as an independent entity within China so that free trade can dominate that area. The Trump administration believes that the United States must protect and defend our economy and our people from harm from any country or source. That means ending, among other things, predatory state-directed subsidies and industrial strategies. We've seen this with economic policy thus far, and the national security strategy puts this as an underpinning of how we're moving forward economically. Ending unfair trading practices. Again, we've seen this as the Trump administration has in place tariffs with many countries around the world. Ending the job destruction and deindustrialization that we have suffered in the United States, and ending grand-scale intellectual property theft and industrial espionage. Again, those types of things have cost us dearly, and we are doubling down on our efforts to protect the American ingenuity that is so critical to our economic engine. Ending threats against our supply chains that risk U.S. access to critical resources, including minerals and rare earth elements. Ending the export of fentanyl precursors that fuel America's opioid epidemic. And ending propaganda, influence operations, and other forms of cultural subversion. So the Trump administration is focused very much in this national security strategy on bringing an end to these things as we focus on Asia and what's going on there. As we turn our eyes to Europe, where we've had a very heavy influence since World War II, the Trump administration continues to value the partnerships there and believes that Europe can continue to what the Trump administration refers to as its former greatness. But the reality is that continental Europe has been losing share of GDP. It's down 25% from 1990 to 14% today of the world's GDP, partly owing to, in the Trump administration's view, national and transnational regulations that undermine creativity and industriousness. They want to continue to manage the relationship between Russia and Europe because the Trump administration sees Russia as a viable world player moving into the future. And frankly, Russia needs that relationship to exist because outside of their war-based economy right now in the Ukraine, they are exporting very little to the world except energy reserves to those people who are not aligning with the sanctions that have been placed against them. In the Middle East, the Trump administration would like to shift the burden or burden share what's going on there to create an equitable peace environment. It'll always be tenuous in the Middle East because of the presence of Israel, but most of the nations of the Middle East would like to see U.S. economic presence without U.S. military presence. And we've seen U.S. military presence there, frankly, since about 1990. We will continue to have some level of presence there, and we will continue to support the nations that align with our interests with military instruction, military exercises, and military capability to hedge against Iran and to ensure that we don't see a rise, once again, of extremism in the Middle East that can move to other parts of the world and threaten world security. The Trump administration does talk about Africa to a certain degree, although the Trump administration with this national security strategy is interested in Africa and what Africa can offer. Right now, the security situation is just not conducive for us to be able to exploit economic partnerships the way we would like to. I think as we move forward into the next decade and into the 21st century, you'll see a continued focus on trying to bring Africa to a place where security and governance will support real economic growth in partnership with the United States and other friendly nations of the world. Now let's shift to South America and talk a little bit about the challenges and opportunities there. And again, if you view the slide, you can see that South America, much like North America, is blessed with incredible resource reserves, a very conducive geography and hydrography for agricultural growth and for industry, but it's also plagued with social unrest. We see that there are problems and challenges with our competitors in South America. And as we talked about with the Monroe Doctrine, our history there is rich, it is strong, and it is favored by many of the countries that we continue to consider partners in South America. So I'd like to walk through just a few countries for a minute or two to talk about where our capability or where our opportunities lie and what some of our challenges may be. I'll start with Paraguay because we have economic interest there. They do share constructive diplomatic ties with us and cooperation on anti-corruption, counter-narcotics, and regional security, which are foundational to the Trump team's approach in our near broads. They have a moderate economic engagement with the United States. We're hoping that will grow with regards to agriculture and trade assistance. And we do have military collaboration with Paraguay and have just signed a status of forces agreement with them, which will give us the opportunity to broaden our military approach in Paraguay. China and Russia are also seeking a relationship there. And Paraguay is, like many of the countries of South America, walking the very delicate tightrope between the partnership they have with the United States and the placement and access that China and Russia are trying to seek. China's efforts there are much more pronounced than Russia's for right now. They're rich in hydro power, notably because of the Itaipu Dam, and possess great agricultural resources. Rare earth potential is not as significant in Paraguay as it is in some places, but we believe that Paraguay is a future possible energy exporter, and that's good news for the people of Paraguay. Brazil, which is part of the BRICS construct, which includes Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is a key partner for the United States and has been for many decades. We continue to enjoy good diplomatic relationships there, and our military ties include joint operations with the Brazilian military. Brazil is, like many of our South American neighbors, very pragmatic in their approach to China and Russia. They're not trying to keep anyone at arm's length, and they are looking for best opportunities. Once again, you go back to the number one rule of foreign policy, which is every country will do what's in their own best interest first. Great natural resources with oil, natural gas, iron ore, bauxite, and an array of agricultural commodities in Brazil. And it is a global leader in biofuels and hydropower. It has rare earth deposits, though large-scale exploration of those is suppressed for right now. Brazil, even though it is the powerhouse of South America, is poised for significant growth as we move into the next decade, and our partnership with them is going to be very important. As we look next at Colombia, a very close U.S. ally, despite the fact that current leadership does not align with the Trump administration. We have a long and rich history of military alliance with Colombia. We were successful in helping the Colombians defeat the FARC and to a certain degree ELN, but we've seen a resurgence of both of those terrorist organizations as we've seen narco trafficking move back into Colombia and put the people and resources there at risk. Their resources include oil and coal and also rare earth minerals. We see the future with Colombia being very bright, but we've got to get past some of the diplomatic challenges we have right now with the leadership in Colombia, very similar to what we're seeing with the leadership challenges in Brazil. And finally, and I'll end on this one because I think it's important, is Venezuela. Probably is there no place where we have more potential for growth and partnership than in Venezuela, and certainly in light of what we saw most recently with the removal of Nicolas Maduro as the illegitimate president, frankly, of Venezuela and his indictment in U.S. courts on drug trafficking charges. We believe there's capacity in Venezuela to really be able to come in and partner with them so that they can get back to optimizing their significant energy resources and reserves. Largest oil reserves in the world are in Venezuela, not in the Middle East. And so as you take a look at all of the opportunities there, the U.S. is poised to be a great partner with them if we can move them away from their support for narco trafficking, narco terrorism, the cartel system, and some of the influence that we've seen come into that country from China, Russia, and notably Iran. We want to see those partnerships dissolve. We want to see the criminal elements move away, and we want to see the Venezuelan people benefit by a new relationship that the Trump administration is very hopeful to build with Venezuela in the coming months and years. So that's a very brief overview of where the Trump national security strategy lies, what you can expect for the United States and for the administration to move forward on with regards to policy, both domestic and foreign policy in the future. All of this is going to have an impact on our markets. All of this is going to open opportunities. Some of it is going to present challenges. I look forward to talking to you next time as we go around the world and take a look at our global perspectives.